Okay, we have Patty is here. Why suddenly am I getting a different menu? Okay, it is roughly 3 minutes in, so I'm going to start. Leslie, I know you're going to want to be a panelist. Some of you have been declined to be panelists, and that's totally fine. We're going to get started. So first of all, welcome. Thank you guys for joining. I am so psyched that this is finally happening. For those of you who don't know, I had a virtual book club before the pandemic, but it wasn't a thing back then. Nobody was really into it, and all we had was audio. We weren't, Leslie, you were there for a couple of them, so we weren't necessarily used to doing this, but I've had a couple people encourage me to do it, and so I did, and here we are. And we're going to talk about the catalyst today. I want to do two quick things before we start. Number one, a quick just sort of baseline. It's totally okay if you haven't read or finished the book, but we're not going to go back to the beginning and explain things just because that ends up taking too much time. I posted a summary. The second thing is that if you want to speak, that's what you're here for. It helps if we can just use the raise your hand feature. I think that's why I did this as a webinar instead of a meeting, because it helps, because I have a feeling this is going to be a lively discussion. So the catalyst, how did I find this book? No, I'm not being paid. I was working on a keynote. I've talked to some of you recently who know that I've been kind of laser focused on one topic for the last 6 or 8 months, and that's activation. Right? We've done great at getting people to talk about customer experience. How do we get anybody to do anything about it? And I was working on a new keynote on that topic. The title is called From Hype to Habit. And I was looking for a way to describe there's something different. There's a certain fundamentally different mindset among the leaders who are most successful in doing this. And what I came up with in my head, with the help of one of my friends who is a master wordsmith, was they operate more as catalysts than crusaders. Crusaders are the people who bring more data and show up and cheerlead and do all that with all the right intentions, but it doesn't work. Catalysts are much more passive looking. But what they're really doing is moving things around behind the scenes and facilitating things happen. So about 2 weeks after coming up with that language, I was bouncing around the bookstore and found this book and went, oh my goodness, are you kidding me? Like, I know this guy, I know this author, and I read it and I said, yes, this, except I haven't written a book about it yet, and he did. So that was why I ended up choosing this book, because so much of what I've seen in my own work in terms of best practices dovetails with a lot of what's in here. So the goal of today's conversation is to see if it's just me or if other people agree, but also talk about how does this catalyst mindset and this catalyst approach, what does it actually look like, and how do we actually do it? And bringing a very cute dog to the meeting helps. So Leslie, I don't know who that is, but welcome. We love furry friends. So I'm going to start off. I posted some discussion questions. We're not going to, anybody who knows me knows I don't follow agendas too well. But to start off, I guess the first question I wanted to pose to the group is, the author, and I just said it, have asserted that you can't force people to change. All you can do is facilitate change. Do we agree with that? I see heads nodding. Yes. Okay. So why? What in your experience has made you, Mark is following directions and raising his hand. Mark, go ahead.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, I've actually I agree. You can't force people into being customer centric or thinking about the customer first. you have to engage them in the reason, and in the kind of the I like to break it down into the vision that we have as servants of the customer, and build a mindset around that, versus just I'm here to do a job. Like, I think about it, like I was talking to someone yesterday about our installers. I work for Frontier Communications, and so we have customers who have technicians who come into their homes. And I was thinking, like the technician's mindset is, I'm here to install fiber. It's not, I'm here to change this person's life, right? I'm here to bring them the promise that we made, right? Completely different. So the way I go about it is really about and because my team is small, I have to do this. It's being an evangelist and influencer, right? And I don't have development teams that I control. And if I'm going to help make change, I have to go and influence others, get them excited about the idea, and then build the support and be relentless. That's the other part, is you got to keep going. It's not just one conversation, at least in my experience.
Yes, absolutely. And I just realized that I wasn't planning on doing a round of introductions, but I just realized that I know who most of you are, but you guys might not know each other. So my bad. If you want to introduce yourself in the chat, your name and your background, go ahead. So Mark mentioned that he's from Frontier Communications. Other folks' thoughts on the difference between forcing and facilitating change? Or action, for that matter, hold a proverbial gun to someone's head, but. Okay, so we all agree, we're in violent agreement. I like this. Oh, 2 hands raised. This is me needing to learn how to use WebEx again. All right, Lonnie first, and then Daniel.
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Lonnie, nice to meet y'all. So I come into customer experience with some background in agile transformation, culture transformation, and marketing. And so I love this book. I found it like 4 or 5 years ago and started using some of it when thinking about mindset change and culture shifts. And one of the things that always comes to mind when I think about not foreseeing change or how do you adjust, is thinking about it from that systems level. Like, I think there's a quote that says I don't know the whole thing, but you fail based on the level of your systems. So back to even what Mark was saying, if you're rewarded on something specific, you're going to follow what you're rewarded on. If you're wanting folks to be customer centric, it's like, what are those things in the systems and your system that are bringing up those topics and making people want to do that? So I agree, it's not forcing them, it's kind of like helping to guide them and say, okay, if this is what we want people to do, let's make sure we know what's in it, they know what's in it for them, and let's make sure we make it as easy as possible.
Yeah, and Lonnie, what you just referenced, the author actually has another book called Invisible Influence. And it is very much about this sort of, what are the forces that influence us that we don't even realize, like the systems. So you kind of just made me think of that is how are we being manipulated without even realizing that we're being manipulated? Daniel, you're next, and then Sarah.
No problem. Thanks very much. Well, first off, I feel very reassured and happy to read this book, because when I say reassured, it's that not being aggressive is actually okay. And I probably couldn't have articulated if someone had said to me, well, you're not necessarily an aggressive person, what is it that you do? I'm not so sure I could have filled in the blanks as articulately as I picked up when I was reading the book. And Megan, I'm a trainer, so I spend my entire life every week in front of people, hoping that they end up using to some degree what they learned, but without using any aggression or crusading. I love that word, because it just pushing things in people's faces, as you pick up from the book, is definitely not going to work. So 3 things that I really picked up from the book very quickly were ask for less. I thought that was remarkable. Ask for less, get that. Go to the next thing. You don't have to ask for everything right up front. I also like chunk to change, which I think is related. And I also like very much ask, don't tell, with the whole point of letting people come to their own conclusions. Because I find, at least in training, once people come to their own conclusions, sometimes in discussion with their peers, by the end or next week or 3 weeks from now or a year from now, they're like, yeah, that works. I'll go with that. But they came to that on their own. So I think that's one of the reasons I really love the book, because it helped me fill in the articulation to a great degree as to, oh, that's what it means to not be a crusader. So anyway, yeah.
I'm so glad to hear that, Daniel. And yes, I think having words to describe things is really powerful. One of the phrases that I use for that ask, don't tell, I take it a little bit further, because there's aggressive and then there's proactive, and there's a difference. I talk about it as engineering the opportunity for people to have their own epiphanies. So I am engineering an epiphany. It may be by asking a question. It may be putting certain information in front of you at a certain time in a certain way. You know, there's a bunch of different things that it can potentially be. Yes, engineering epiphanies there's a fine art to it. Sarah Schumann, you're next. There are multiple Sarahs on the call now.
Sorry. Hi. So I really enjoyed this book. I was leading CX at Boston University, and nobody there was quite ready to hear about customer experience. And so I really had to lean into leading and changing through influence, which ignited this whole new passion and curiosity in me. And so I got my master's in organization development and change, because I knew to be successful, I needed to understand how to influence change across the organization. And so a few things that this book really resonated with me. For example, I loved the Acura example, where people just didn't want to drive an Acura. They didn't know about it. And so Acura worked with, I think, the Weston, worked with the W and said, hey, anytime you need to go someplace across the city, our dealership will give you the car and bring you places. And so people had the opportunity to experience the brand without it being pushed on them, right? So it's small little steps, and all of a sudden Acura's sales increased. And then the other thing that I kept thinking about, not in this book, but was with Atomic Habits, and how people form habits, right? Because what you do is, like, you wake up in the morning, you brush your teeth, you never take your vitamins, but if you put your vitamins next to your toothbrush, then it becomes a habit. And so in the work that I was doing, I jumped into new employee orientations to greet people, introduce myself, and immediately say what customer experience meant in development, right? And so slowly got people engaged and curious in how they could better just like show up and capture. I focus mainly on VOC and find different ways to capture VOC that I hadn't already considered. And so it was just, again, with that, like brand new role, brand new environment, insert CX right away. And I found to have great success with that.
Yeah, and I love that you brought up Atomic Habits. Who knows, maybe that could be a book for a future session. But one of the things that I do when I work with clients, or that I encourage people to do, is habit stack for others. So combining, Daniel, what you talked about, which is asking for less, but asking for less in increments that build on each other. Liz, you had something you wanted to add.
Yeah, excuse me. I wanted to add, so I work a lot with clinical folks, and clinical folks are scientists, and they always want the data, right? If I show up without the data, the convincing points, then I'm not allowed in the room, or I get some pretty nasty looks. However, the data is usually not enough. So what I think I love from this book was the idea that the data is sort of a necessary but not sufficient for certain groups that are science-minded, right? Showing up with the convincing points. If I'm working, for example, on well-being, and I've got phenomenal data, things like mindfulness, things that they consider woo. If I don't have any data, I'm going to stay in the woo camp. If I show up with the data, they're still skeptical, right? The data's there, they've seen it, but there needs to be some other piece that connects to where they are, what they want. So I'm thinking about the test prep example that was in the book, where it's like, you don't want to put in that many hours to study. Okay, great, but you really want to go to school. What do you think it's going to take to get there? That same kind of, I don't want to say manipulation, but framing of the situation is behavioral economics. How do I make this pathway align to your goals and preferences and entry point?
Yeah, no, Liz, your audio was cutting out a little bit. So I think we got most of what you were saying, but I think you were saying that the data is a point of entry, but you have to think about what is it beyond the data. Like that's a starting point. And one of the things I came up with one day, I was talking to a client and we had data, we had given them data, and they still were, all they were doing was tearing apart the data. And I was like, all right, they don't want more data. What do they really want? And they don't want data, they want confidence. And sometimes data isn't going to give them confidence. The confidence comes from some other place. Beth, you had something you wanted to say. Go ahead.
Hi, Megan. I was going to ask you too. Do you have a reading list on your website? Because basically every book I read comes from your recommendation. I've read so many books because of you.
That is part of why I started this book club. But I will go ahead and add one on I just launched a new website a couple of months ago, and there's a resources section. So I will add a reading list to that.
There's demand for that, let me tell you. No,
okay.
My thought on this too was that when you do this work for so long, you become so entrenched in it and so inside baseball that you forget the process of bringing people along with you. And so I was really enjoying reading through this and getting inspired again, because I go through points where I get kind of beaten down by this work and how hard it is convincing people to change when you know the answer is correct and you just need to get them there. So I think we all can use a bit of inspiration once in a while. And this came at a really good point for me as well, just to be kind of inspired. And I think we're fundamentally optimists doing this kind of work. You have to be, I think. But it's a really good reminder to that I don't know if I buy the theory that any change is possible, but all the examples of changes you would not have thought as being possible and actually did happen is really inspirational.
Yeah, and that one of the things that really resonated with me from in terms of talking about the resistance was this idea of oh, I can't remember, why can't I think of the name of it right now? The region of rejection and the zone of acceptance, and the idea that because I've worked in, a lot of us have worked in different companies, that depending on how far what we're talking about is from their current set of beliefs, like what is the next step that are we asking them to believe something that is so radically different from what they believe today that it's just too big of a leap for them to make. That was a nuance that I sort of have done and seen in my practice, but had never, to your point, Daniel, articulated or had words for. Gloria, you had something you wanted to add. Go ahead.
Well, thank you, Megan, for hosting this. This is just, honestly, this book is exactly what we needed right at this right time. I work at the American Medical Association, and we're managing a communications matter that's associated with violence in the Mideast. So we're in a major rapid response mode. And I was just talking about how this book really resonates with some of that, and particularly the whole idea of the zone of acceptance and rejection. And sometimes all you can do is be there to listen if people's views are so far away from where you are. So actually, I just spoke to my team, Jeff, and our brand new staff, Sarah, just joined here, we just left that meeting. And so we've already put this into practice. So that was very, very helpful. But I wanted to add on to the whole idea of data. I think the thing that resonated with me is that for a long time, we've been using voice of the customer data to share with our stakeholders, to compel them to action, right? To provide actionable insights and get to the next step of solutioning. And that's a slog. And I think Beth said that well, and someone else, Beth and Liz both. And I was thinking about something that really was a game changer for us. It's maybe sometimes not just that it is confidence. They need confidence that what we're saying is really actionable and will change, will get us to a different outcome. But sometimes it's a different kind of data, like more interesting, more active. So I'll give you an example. We just executed quantum metric last year for digital monitoring. We started with a pilot, and then we've expanded it to almost all of our digital monitoring platforms. And it's like watching TV. So instead of getting the stakeholder to look at our data and believe it and just try to rationalize it, Jeff has been, well, come watch with me and maybe you'll have an insight. And it's just, sometimes it's just showing it, show and tell, or doing something in a way that's very, very different. And we're so scientific and we want that credibility. We want those analytics. We want to do prediction. We want to forecast it. But our stakeholders really, it's too much maybe sometimes what we're laying on them. So sometimes it's a different kind of data or a different approach as well that gives them the confidence to take action or something.
No, you're absolutely right, Gloria. And I love that show and tell. I'll share an example because part of what I want to do here is promote success stories. We spend so much time talking about what doesn't work, but there's a lot of stuff that's working. I'll tell you a story from my own experience. That same client I was working with, where I said, all right, they don't want data. Or if I give them data, they're still not going to do anything because what they really want is confidence. What gives them confidence? So we kind of looked across the past history and said, when has this leadership team acted decisively? And it was whenever they heard something directly from the mouth of a customer. So what we started doing was finding people, customers, who had articulated sentiments similar to what had been coming in the data and the verbatims, and actually hosting live conversations with those and opening it up to all the employees. And it took 3 years, but it has now gotten to the point where the CEO, one of the customers who participated emailed the CEO and said, I don't know if you know these are happening or are watching them, but you should be. And so that CEO asked for a summary of these conversations with customers and gets one for their operating committee. And it's funny, we had a new person join the team. And I said, this is not about net new research. This is about getting people to hear from a human things we've been telling them for years that they haven't been listening. And I've been amazed at how powerful that has been. Leslie, you've patiently had your hand up, so go ahead.
I am gonna just +1 to both Gloria and Megan on that. I've been around this industry, CX, for 26 years or so. And I would say the first 23 years, the data source was survey-based data, and which serves a purpose and has value. But the last 3 years I've spent around a different data source. Gloria, to your point, like sometimes you just gotta bring in something different. And that data source is the authentic voice of our customers when they reach out to the contact center in their moments of struggle and their moments of inquiry. And I've learned over the past 3 years, my eyes have been opened to this challenge that CX professionals have been facing around taking action. And I'm seeing that this data set that is different is perceived as more confident with decision makers and leaders, to your point, Megan. And then I'm also seeing the way that we share the data we call it data-backed storytelling, but it's really the combination of quantitative data, but then telling these micro stories where they can hear it. They're taking action in the meeting. It's a completely different experience than the 23 years before it. So I'll share that as like a best practice.
Absolutely. Lonnie, you had your hand raised again. Go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to share an example of kind of some of the ones that have inspired me. And this was on the employee engagement side. So how do we get the employees to also, well, the leaders to figure out how to help the employees? And so one of the things that I had done with my team was we had done a survey, had gotten, all the responses from the employees, and we had the executives come together and we actually put all the quotes on banners. And so they were on banners, and then the executives could walk around the room and actually read them. So rather than sending them like a Word doc or a spreadsheet, they were visually reading them, and you could just see in their faces like the reaction to it. And so it made it so that it was less, I feel like it kind of humanized him more, where they saw it and they were like, oh, okay, all right. And so they got a little bit more bought into, yes, we do need to make these changes to then help that internal employee engagement.
Yeah, it's amazing when you actually introduce the fact that your customers are humans. That shouldn't be as foreign a concept as it is. And but I work with a lot of big B2B companies, and the simple fact that it's like, these are, yes, they're executives of whatever, but they're also humans. Janita, you raised your hand. We've got a bunch of people with their hands up. So we'll go Janita, and then Patty, and then Mark.
All right, mine's more of a question for everyone. What really intrigued me was the kind of the negative parts of like the financial professional showing how much you have to lose for not investing, or the burning bridges concept of like literally burning bridges. But like, is there anybody has had examples of being able to show like, what do you have to lose to stay, if you're staying complacent, what do you have to lose, and like what is the potential for staying the way you are versus making customer centric changes?
Anybody want to answer that? Sarah, is that what you raised your hand for? Liz, you did too. Sarah, why don't you start? Yeah. And Liz.
Sure. So Janita, one concrete example that I go back to is, again, working with the Alumni Association during the summer 2020 after George Floyd was murdered. Our university didn't say anything, and I was able to take the customer data, all of the emails and phone calls that we got saying, we're not going to donate anymore if you don't make a statement. And I was able to quickly like pull that together, find out what their giving history was, and say, this is what this is going to mean if you don't make a statement. A statement was made, and it was too... It didn't take a side, it was just kind of acknowledged it, which caused even more of an uproar. And so I was able to take that and share it again with the president. And that was very powerful. And it really helped to solidify the impact that this program that I had implemented meant to our fundraising efforts.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Liz, you had something.
Yeah, and I'm hoping you can hear me better now that I've pointed my microphone actually at my mouth instead of at my forehead. So yes. Apologies for that earlier. And I don't have a straightforward example because it's really complicated in healthcare. So first two things. One is there's patient experience. And certainly we have evidence that when patients are treated with dignity and respect and feel trust and connection, there are significantly better outcomes. So if you don't move towards that, you don't have better outcomes. And yet, some interpretations of patient experience get really punitive for clinicians and are asking them to act like they're hotel managers as opposed to scientists, professionals, people with huge responsibilities in life and death decision making. So and then on the other side of that, where I work now mostly is more with what you'd call employee experience. So physician and staff safety and well-being. And again, we have all kinds of evidence that when people are cognitively overloaded, for example, they make more medical errors, and that has huge implications for burnout, for patient experience, and things like that. And yet trying to get people to make those changes, because the systems are so complex, and whether you're cognitively overloaded has to do with things like the regulations around what you have to document, the EHR systems that were created in which to document it. It's also complicated that that consequences of inaction are known, and yet the pathway towards action is still really difficult. So I think I'm sharing this not to discourage anyone or say, hey, healthcare is super crazy complicated, which it is, but to say that often, even in terms of that action of the pointing out the consequences of inaction, there's a broader frame in it. And so when I'm talking about these things, similarly, there are things clinicians can do for their own well-being, but if I don't address some of those system complications first, they don't want to hear it, because it sounds like I'm blaming them for the burdens they're bearing in the system. So I think as you're looking at that, it's helpful to take that whole big picture into place and figure out, even if the consequences of inaction are clear, how do you frame action in a way that feels accessible, feels non-punitive, and feels really helpful for folks?
Yeah, Liz, I think that's a great insight and ties back to the concept of atomic habits and asking for less, and also invisible influence. I bought a whole new set of dishes about 10 years ago because they said the bigger your plate, the more you eat, the smaller your plate, the less you eat. And I said, all right, well, I'm trying to eat less. So rather than try to weigh and measure everything, what if I just bought smaller plates? And I did. And I don't know if it's helped or not, but it was a way to kind of force myself to do that. Patty, you have been incredibly patient. Go ahead. Oh, you're muted.
I agree with what Liz was just saying. We live in an incredibly complex and complicated world, and there is nobody out there who has an easy job anymore. And I think the first thing that we can do is acknowledge that. And I think the easier and less complicated, Janita, you can make things for the people you're with, the better. And one of the easiest ways to do that, and because your question fed in exactly to what I wanted to say, one of the easiest ways to do that is find out what matters to the other people that are in your organization and start speaking their language. We as CX people somehow have developed this expectation that people are going to speak ours, and that's just wrong. Like, we have to learn to speak other people's language and find out what matters to them. And I have a really good concrete example of that just happened this past week in my job. So I started working at Upwork, which is a tech company. We're an online platform that matches freelancers and organizations together to help fill jobs. They're mostly temporary jobs, but basically that's what we do. And when I started with the company, I had this great luxury of going on an amazing listening tour. And so on this listening tour, I was able to find out what mattered to the business unit that I was working with, which is basically the unit that does like all the business for the company, and finding out what the partners all wanted. So one of the first things that I had to pull together in putting together a customer profile in this one particular category that was a growing category for our business and is now stagnated, I pulled in and put all those pieces, Janita, in that matter to them. And I was able also to quantify different things. I quantified the quotes that I used. I quantified how much that client or how much that freelancer meant to our organization. And I quantified how much a promoter, a passive, and a detractor meant to our organization. And I will tell you that I'm pretty far down the food chain. I report to a director who reports to a senior director who reports to a VP who reports to somebody else who reports eventually to the CEO. But that report that I did, Janita, it went all the way to the CEO. And it earned my boss's boss a seat at the ELT. And it was all because I listened to what mattered to everybody else, and I put that inside it, and I quantified it. So I know exactly, and I did it intentionally.
Yeah. Patty, I love that example. And I love that example for a couple reasons. Number one, it's that you attached numbers to the individual things and kind of aggregated them together. I think it's also a great example of, you said, what do they care about? Implicit in that statement is a recognition that they care, right? One of the things that is kind of in the larger narrative around customer experience is, well, we just need to get employees to care more. And in my experience, people care, right? People have heard me say this. Nobody shows up to work and goes, how many ways can I piss my customers off today, right? We don't do it intentionally. And one of the ways I talk about that is I talk about the fact that scale creates problems that empathy can't solve. Back to your point, Liz, about the systems. You reach a certain point at which care more doesn't solve the problem because people care, but the system is so complex that caring still doesn't enable them to do what needs to be done. And so you kind of pulled up that caring, you pulled up the systematizing it. And I'm not surprised that worked. Congratulations. But I think that's a great takeaway for people because, this idea that, nobody cares. No, actually they do care and they're pretty darn frustrated.
Yeah. And it's what do they care about?
Yes.
So, and I was able to narrow right into that, because like I said, I had the luxury of the listening tour. Had I not had that luxury, it had been a lot more difficult. But had I not had that luxury, I would have found out another way. And that's where I think persevering, I'm getting information to me and I'm asking for another piece of information right now. And I've been asking for this piece of information for weeks from my company. And I keep getting told no. And I found somebody else to ask today. So, you just got to keep going and persevere. And like I said, everybody's job is hard. It's not just us. And I think that the more that we wallow in that, a CX person's job is hard, the harder it's going to be. But if instead we say, my job's hard, but so is this person's and this person's and this person's, and how can I make their job easier? I think goes a really long way.
That's really powerful. Sarah Schumann.
So Patty, when you were talking, I was reminded of an engagement index, customer index score that I used to run, which looked at the different ways that customers were engaging with the company, right? Whether it was just one-to-one conversations, whether it was trainings, whether it was social media, whatever it was. And then based on those scores, in their engagement in those different buckets, I was able to go to the teams that oversaw that particular area and just kind of was like, hey, how's it going? What are your metrics? Da, 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 da. And really got to know what their goals were. And, what do you wish? And they'd be like, oh God, I wish I had a more engaged audience, right? I'm like, oh, interesting. If I could show you a group of people who are looking for further engagement, would that be helpful? And so I was immediately able to go and show them, hey, this is where this index lives, and this is how you can access it based on your goals. And we were able to see that through that partnership, they were able to work smarter because they were better able to target the exact group that they were hoping to bolster, whether it was, again, like through social, through email, through better events.
Yeah, I love that, Sarah. And that's a great example of a strategy that I call facilitating first steps. You can't just throw it over the wall. We've all sat in workshops where we go, okay, you should be able to do this, but we have to have a workshop because you're not going to make time and you're not going to think about how to do it. If you can help facilitate those first steps for people, very often they'll take it from there. But if you don't do that, they either won't know or they won't set aside the time because, as Patty said, everybody's job is hard. Okay. So I wanted to probe into one area a little bit that I don't think gets enough airtime from a change management and an influence perspective. The author calls it corroborating evidence. I have a slightly different take on that. I call it social proof. So social proof is a concept from psychology of it's, hey, I can look around and what are other people doing? And what I see in my experience, either from people going, well, what do other companies do? Or from successes in getting 1 or 2 people in an organization to be willing to try something who may not be the most senior, but who are very well respected. Oh, well, if, Mikey likes it, then, Mikey's willing to do it, then other people are willing to do it, referencing cereal commercials for those of you who may not have gotten that reference. And this concept of social proof, one of the things I've found is that executives very often think they're doing good things, and they are. They don't realize nobody knows. Nobody sees it because they spend all of their time with the same 5% of people. And so as CX folks, not necessarily getting people to do more, but getting more exposure of what is being done to a broader set of people, so that they can go, oh, hey, this is happening in different places. And I'm just curious if others have had experience with that, or if you've tried that or thought about it. Liz.
Yeah, so in terms of the well-being behaviors, right, trying to get physicians, nurses, other team members to, for example, take breaks, breathing, all that kind of stuff. We have always, a lot of hospitals have set up, for example, respite rooms, places where clinicians can go, it's quiet, they can have a moment. And if you don't get somebody with either actual or conferred authority to use it, nobody else will, because they don't feel like they have permission to step away. So yeah, it's part of our change management approach whenever we introduce something. And even if it's not a self-care thing, if it's a change in a process, right? Starting it in one unit and then having those unit folks come and talk to others about how it helped them, why the change was still hard, but what they learned in the way and why it's beneficial. You're not going to get it to spread. So that's the only way we can do change management that I've found in healthcare.
Yeah. I had another example where a CEO came in and was very proud of themselves because they had told a customer no. And this company's modus operandi was usually they would always say yes, yes, yes. And it was actually creating more problems than it was helping because it was complicating matters. And he was very proud of having the fortitude to say, I get that you want that. We're not going to do that because it causes these other systemic problems. And I almost wished I had a video camera to record that and show it around to people. Sarah Giancola, apologize if I mispronounced your name. Go ahead.
Pronounced it correctly. Thanks, Megan. I previously worked at a financial services company, and something we did on a weekly basis, actually, it was a meeting for our executives and our frontline call center folks. It was called End Your Week with the Customer. And we would basically play customer calls on a weekly basis. And we had trouble at first getting executives kind of to show up to the meeting. They were busy with their own things. And I think an example of something we did really well there was we identified a few key executives that were really interested, and then noticed that the others were following after a couple of weeks. But one of the things that happened on those calls, in addition to some of the sentiments people have already echoed on this call, is people really basically we're having brainstorming ideas on the calls. And we also heard about solutions on the calls too. So that was kind of a way for other departments to hear oh, okay, here's how we're troubleshooting customer issues. And here are the actual problems that we're solving. And, commercial got to hear business banking talk about their problems. So it was kind of a way to story tell and listen kind of all in one combined meeting, I guess. And the other piece I would say about promoting or storytelling is we did these monthly wins that were really helpful. And a couple of us on our strategy team would just go out to the different business lines and just hear what folks were doing, and then, you know, summarize them in a document and share them out on a monthly basis so people could read through them and listen.
Yeah, and Sarah, there's a secret weapon in that story that you may or may not have even realized. Just getting people to know each other. When I was very early in my career, my division manager did something called 6 for lunch, and he would have his admin pick 6 random people from across the division at all different levels and say, you guys are going to lunch together, plan it, figure it out. And the company would pay for it. And so I was like, I think it was 23, 24, and I was sitting there with VPs that I would never, A, have had reason to work with, or B, have ever been in a room with. This is what happens when you get an IT manager who used to be a social worker. He was one of the best managers I ever had. And the idea was that when you look at how collaboration happens, it happens in part, and it happens more through personal relationships. So once people have been in a room and talked to each other, they may not know the answer, but they're more likely to pick up the phone and say, oh, hey, I heard so-and-so talking about this at this meeting. And they're less hesitant to just cold calls. They're not cold calling someone, and they feel like they have a place to start. There was another company I worked with that found that when collaboration happened, it happened because there were people who'd been in the organization for 25 years and knew everybody everywhere. They said, how do we replicate that? So with new people, they started a program where their first couple months were literally just meeting with people from all the different departments to build that network of relationships, so that if you're not sure, you at least have someone who you know, who you can pick up the phone and call and go, I don't know if this is you, but you know, help me get this to the next level. Vasu, you are raising your hand, so go ahead.
Thank you. Just to building on Sarah, what Sarah said, I just remembered another thing that we did to also influence change in one of my previous jobs. This was about a digital transformation we were trying to sell, right, to the executives. Ask was big. Data, to your point, Megan, earlier, they were tearing apart the data we were presenting left and right. So at some point, it became very clear that it was not the data that was the problem. So the business case was not the problem. So what we did was we set up some time with the executives, and we had a digital tool, an analytics tool, which recorded sessions on the website, customer sessions. So we made them watch some of those sessions, and they watched for themselves as the customer struggled to log in, to figure out how to submit something, to figure out how to, you know, what comes next in the process. So they watched it painfully we made them sit through it for an hour. And people were fidgeting in their seats because these are our doers, these are decision makers. So they couldn't really watch somebody struggling without doing anything about it. And I think that nudged them towards a decision, and we got the funding. So after months of data and presentations and storytelling, them actually seeing it really helps move the needle. So just another way to influence, just show them.
Yeah, they experienced a fraction of the frustration that other people experienced. Jeff Phillips, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Megan. Yeah, I guess two things. I want to echo what Bazu was saying and Gloria said earlier about playing user sessions. You know, we have a very recent example where a user was trying to find one of our products, and we had a recording where it was 20 minutes, 27 different clicks to try and find where they were going. And when we showed our business partners this, it was solved within a week. Definitely gets movement. For 3 days, as Gloria's showing. But the other thing I wanted to talk about too, in terms of adoption, is that we found really helps is every year we do a CX forum, which is a big showcase where, you know, one, we'll give a high level overview of what we're doing with CX, because it brings in a lot of new people that are just learning what we're doing. But we also share case studies of what business partners have done. We start with showing what the customer problem was, what they did to solve it, what that impact was. And it's a really good feel-good event, great stories. And it's very well diversified too in terms of different parts of the organization. You see someone from IT, a product manager, maybe somebody a little more higher level up, and VP role, all sorts of different people there showing what they're doing, what the impact was. It's exciting, gets a good buzz going. And the last time we did it this past spring, we picked up a couple new stakeholders that reached out and were like, we're interested, we want to work with you, we have problems, how can you help us fix them?
Yeah, and that's proof, Jeff, that I love that example for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's proof that there are successes happening. We tend to focus so much on the negative that we forget there are successes happening. But I think it also switches the mindset of, instead of doing less of what's broken, let's find ways to do more of what's working. And I think that's a natural human. You'll find as we go through the book club that a lot of the books we read will be sort of psychology and human behavior based, because this would be easy if it weren't for the humans. And a lot of these things about how we as humans tend to naturally think and be biased, if we can understand those and kind of pivot on them, it helps to do that. And that's a great example of doing that. Daniel, you had your hand up next, and then Gloria.
Sure, quickly, because you're on corroborating evidence, and there was a part of the book about you got to bring in similar points of view and diverse points of view. So I actually had to read that a couple times to make sure I got it right, but I have an actual example. So one of the services we provided over the years is lots and lots of mystery shopper. One of the clients was HSBC in Singapore. We did their branch mystery shopper, and here's what literally happened. Every month we'd go in, do the branch mystery shopper, assemble the results. Then all the branch managers had to come and attend the meeting. The branches that got the highest scores were able to share the stories on what they had done in principle to allow the other branch managers to learn. Here's what happened in the first meeting that woke us up. The branch that had won, or the top three, were in the most wealthy postal codes. Were dealing with entirely different kinds of millionaire customers. And so one of the feedback, so we picked this up after the meeting had ended, is, well, of course they get top. They've got the best facilities and they've got the richest customers, blah, 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 blah. So what we did from then on forward is, when we got the high scores for different postal codes and regions, we would reach out to those people before the meeting and say, hey, you're in this neighborhood in Topayo. So that it feels similar to other people that are in more rural or less wealthy postal codes. Could you share your stories? And then I think what happened is that's when, as you all said, the dialogue really started to happen between the branch managers, because now it wasn't just the high-end people who always got it. It was, well, we can also do it, and you can do it in your area too. And this cross-pollination, it was a very interesting thing to see, and a bit of a wake-up call, to be honest. So
yeah, and I love that, Daniel. And it's I have my own sort of permanent wake-up call. My mom retired last year, but until then she was a frontline retail manager and has been my entire life. And every once in a while I get a call going, somebody like you told somebody at corporate that we should do this stupid thing that isn't actually going to help customer experience, but now we got to do. And I always had that in the back of my head when I was thinking about, all right, what am I telling people? Here's my mom working in a store where she's paying people $8 an hour. How is that going to translate down? And is that really going to do anything? So I think it helps if we all have a little bit of that, not even an angel, but a realist on our shoulder. Gloria, you've been waiting patiently. Go ahead.
I'm trying to remember what I was going to say now.
Sorry.
I had something. Oh, I know. Okay. Yeah. So just, as Jeff said, our mantra is all the glory goes to stakeholders. When Jeff and I started this program in 2017, I just said, I appreciate you, Todd. I report to our CXO, who reports to our chief executive. So we have a really close line to the executive team. It is like a gift, and I'm grateful for that every single day. But I said, the team knows how difficult this is. Management understands that we are going to do some things well, and we are going to fail as we learn on some things. But so I appreciate you. I'll be the one to tell you. In the meantime, all the glory goes to our stakeholders. And we grew our stakeholder team from about 30 people to 400, which is a third of AMA's staff who are at the Chicago headquarters. So that has been a very effective approach, but you have to have a level of trust on your team that they will be recognized, because these guys, and Sarah just joined our team, and we're so excited to have her. But people have to really know they will get recognized, but that's not the place. The second thing is that I'll tell you a case. I've been at the AMA for a very long time. I have deep relationships with senior leadership. One of the senior leaders came to me and said, you know, Gloria, I just got to tell you something. These CX meetings you're hosting every month, they're really great. You guys are doing a great job, but you are really bringing our team down. I'm like, bringing your team down? I mean, we're providing UAT, we're giving CX design, we're creating journey maps and blueprints and voice of the customer data, and we're preparing to figure out how we can help them. Bringing you down, like, oh my gosh, how?
Yeah.
And she said, my staff here, all your insights are actionable, but they just are buried. There's only so much that they can do, and they never feel like they never feel it's enough. You recognize them in our CX forum, you know, you thank them, but when does it end? And I said, well, unfortunately, it's a continuous process improvement. It's probably not going to end. So how can we reframe this? And so she just asked if you can just think of making them more involved in what's right.
Yep.
So we went back to the drawing board and we thought, well, we don't know too much about what's right. We know everything about what's wrong. So we had speech analytics in the contact center, and it's not perfect for this use, but we're using it. And Jeff's team is mining those data so that we start every single monthly partner meeting with a convo, a recorded convo from a real customer for that month about something that was fabulous. Something that went well, and that changed the entire combo. We start the meeting with that. We celebrate that success. We thank them for the work that requires to do products, marketing, you know, all of the data architecture.
Absolutely.
And that helped a lot, but we still need to work there. I mean, that's the thing. We have to remember that we're polite pests always, and we're constantly
the Polite Pests Club.
Yes.
I love it. I love it. Listen, Gloria, I hate to cut you off, but we are at the top of the hour, and we've already had a couple people had to drop off. Thank you guys so much. Real quickly, you're going to get a link to the recording of this so you can go back and rewatch it. In about a week, I'm going to send you my key takeaways. There is a discussion forum on thebookclubs.com. So if you have thoughts, additional questions, things like that, throw them up there. And we'll be sending you a preview. Our next book is not until February. It is a little bit of a tougher read, but it is absolutely worth it. So we'll send you some stuff to preview that one. Thank you, everybody, so much.
Thank
We'll
you.
see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Megan.
Thank you, Megan.
Thank you so much, Megan. This is great.